This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Guten Erev. Shabbos Hachodesh. Bruchim Habayim. This first year today, I would like to share with you some thoughts about Parshas Hachodesh. We know that the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Nissan is designated as Parshas Hachodesh. We read the section in Parshas Beis, Hachodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim Rishon Hu Lachem Lechodshei Hashana. Okay, and at first glance it would seem that this is an appropriate Torah reading for Chodesh Nissan. After all, we know as the introduction to the report that Hashem is going to take us out of Mitzrayim, the Rebbe Hashem gave Klal Yisrael their very first mitzvah, namely the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, of sanctifying the new moon and designating Nisan as the first month of the year. So, because the introduction to Yetzias Mitzrayim was the designation of Nisan as the first month of the year and the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, it's an appropriate way to sort of kick off the season of Nisan by reading Parshas Hachodesh. But I would like to perhaps offer another insight into the important connection between the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh and the month of Nisan. In other words, it's interesting. As the introduction to the month of Nisan, so we understand the Rebbe Shalom changed time and designated Nisan as the first month of the year, but he also gave us the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. It's certainly worthy of our attention. Again, let's focus on this point. Namely, there are two things that are taking place. Number one, Hashem is designating Nisan as the first month of the year. Secondly, the Rebbe Hashem is giving the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. What exactly is the connection between the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh and the Yom Tov of Rosh Chodesh and Nisan being the first month of the year? Hashem could have given the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh any time. He could have said, sanctify the new month, there's something called Rosh Chodesh, and it did not have to be in the association of Nisan being the first month of the year. As if, like, these two things go together. Nisan being the first month of the year is connected to the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. So, I want to share with you a few thoughts regarding Rosh Chodesh and the Malchus Beis Dovid. In the Gemara Masechta Rosh Hashanah Daf Chaf Hey Amud Aleph, Amar Le Rabbi LeRabbi Rabbi said to Rabbi Zil la'ayin tav v'kitshe liyacha. Go look well and be mekadesh the new month. The problem was the Romans made a decree that the Jewish people were not allowed to sanctify the new month, so Rabbi would have a hard time relaying the information to Rabbi. So Rabbi said, V'shalach li, send me the following message. V'shalach li simna, Dovid melech Yisrael chai v'kayam. David, king of Israel, lives and endures. Now, how is that a siman that is Rosh Chodesh? So we see from here that Dovid is a siman to the new moon. One of the reasons is, Kabbalistically, Dovid is the Merkava to Malchus. And Malchus is one of the 10 Sfiros. As Dovid is the Melech Yisrael, the corresponding Sfira to Melech is Malchus. Malchus is the 7th Sfira, and it is Mekabel Shefa from Tiferes. And the goal of all of our mitzvahs and avodas Hashem is to influence that Tiferes should influence Malchus. Tiferes should be the Noisein, and Malchus should be the Mekabel. In fact, the Rabbi Yosef Engel has a famous drasha called Mamar Levana. And in Mamar Levana, Rabbi Yosef Engel points out, we don't just say Dovid Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. We say Dovid Melech Yisrael. Why? Because the kavanah is not just for Dovid as the king, but Dovid represents the sphera of Malchus. And the avodah is to have Tiferes influence Malchus. That's why in the beginning of Kish Levana, we say V'la Levana Amar Shetischadesh Ateres Tiferes La'amuse Vaten. That is Tiferes. Lehischadesh Kamoisa. Ulefa'er liyotzram, again, a lashon of ulefar tiferes. Al shem kavod malchusai, that's Malchus. So again, you see in the bracha 2 references to tiferes and a reference to kavod malchus. And the avoida is tiferes should be mashpia on Malchus. This is an idea we came across a number of times in the Sefer Tomer Devaira. But we're now pointing out that the sun represents tiferes, the moon represents Malchus. That's why in Kel Adon we say Pierre v'chavahai noisnim lishmai tzahala verina lezecher Malchusai. We say Pe'er, that's Tiferes. Tzahala verina lezecher Malchusai. Now, we say in the Torah Hachodesh says, Zeh shemi le'alam v'zeh zichri le'dardar. Hashem's shame is Yud Kei Vav Kei. His zecher is Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. That's why we say, Pe'er v'chavayid noisnim l'shmai. Tiferes' name is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's why Pe'er, Tiferes, is Lishmai, is for the name of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Tzala Verina is Lezecher, is for Aleph Dal Nun Yud, which is Malchusai, which is the moon. The moon is Malchus. The moon is Makabel, the light of the sun. The sun is Tiferes. The sun influences the moon. Dovid HaMelech is the moon. How is Dovid HaMelech the moon? Dovid HaMelech merely is a reflection of the Malchus Shamayim. Les Leimi Garmei Klum. The moon has no independent light. Dovid has no independent entity. The reason why Dovid is the Melech is because he allows himself to be the absolute reflection of the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the sovereignty of Shamayim, Malchus Shamayim. Dovid is the sun. Yikoin Shemai La'olam. Yinoin Shemai. Dovid HaMelech is constantly in the Tanakh reference to the sun. We say, Shehem asidim l'schadesh kamoisa, that the same way the moon will rejuvenate, the Malchus Beis Dovid will rejuvenate. Why do you think we say in Kiddush Havana, Dovid Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim? Dovid is compared to the moon. Dovid is Malchus. He reflects Tiferes. He reflects the sun. He is Aleph Dal Nun Yud. By the way, the Bnei Yissaschar points out, as well as Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his Siddur, Hachodesh hazeh lachem. Lachem is oisios melech. Lachem is oisios melech. Now, why then the reference to Rosh Chodesh in connection with Nissan being the first month of the year? Now we know there's an idea that the 12 months of the year correspond to the 12 Shvatim. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his Siddur says Chodesh Nissan corresponds to Eruvin. However, the Bnei Yissaschar brings that based on a different system, based on the Sefer Sharei Oira, the month of Nissan corresponds to Shevet Yehuda. That is the idea. The month of Nissan corresponds to Shevet Yehuda. Let's see if I could find that. The month of Nissan corresponds to Shevet Yehuda. The Bnei Yissaschar is found in Mamari Chodesh Nissan, Maimar Aleph, Ois, Hey. He says, this month, Nissan, is the Melech of all the Chadashim. HaChodesh is at Lachem, Melech. Also, if you look in the beginning of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh Nissan is Rosh Hashanah le Melachim. It's Rosh Hashanah for kings, Jewish kings, not Gentile kings, Jewish kings. So therefore, even though Al Pi the Arizal, it corresponds to Shevet Ruvain, Al Pi the Sefer Sharei Oira, which is the Rabbi Yosef Giktilia, the months of the year correspond to the Shvatim in the way they encamped, and the first Shevet that traveled was Shevet Yehuda. Therefore, Nisan corresponds to Shevet Yehuda. And the Bnei Yissaschar speaks at length that the sovereignty of a melech and his power is recognized b'diburai, through his speech, through his words. When a melech speaks, the people are fearful. The midah of Malchus, we compared Melech to God's sphere of Malchus. When we were in Golos, the pasuk says in Tehillim Perek Lamed Tes Pasuk Gimel, Ne'elamti dumia, I was silent, I was still. When we're in Golos, it's like Malchus is silent. The Melech doesn't speak. You look in Yeshaya, Perek Nun Gimel, Kirachel lefnei goizezeha na'alama. A sheep before it's shorn is silent. In the Golos, Malchus is silent. In the Geula, you talk. The way Malchus is manifest is you talk. Therefore, Pesach stands for Pesach, the mouth that speaks. The liberation of Malchus is manifest through speech. And that's why it's a Yom Tov. Pesach is a Yom Tov that is focused on the Peh, Achila, Dibor, especially Dibor, Sipor, Yitzias Mitzrayim. By the way, when you spell out Pesach, Pehei, Samaches, the Hey is pronounced Tar Shabal Peh, but it's not written. We write it Pei Samach Ches, because Tar Shabal Peh is the midah of Malchus, so it has to be oral, it can't be written. The midah of Malchus is connected with Torah Shabal Peh. So now, the Shar Yisachar of the Munkacher writes as follows. We learned on Tuesday that when we say that the month of Nissan is the first month of the year, and we learned from the Shla Hachodesh that each day of Nissan has Kedushas Rosh Chodesh. And this gives us even further insight. Since Rosh Chodesh is so associated with Dovid HaMelech, every day of Nissan is considered like Rosh Chodesh. What's interesting is that the first day of Nisan corresponds to Nisan. The second day of Nisan corresponds to Iyar. The third day of Nisan corresponds to Sivan. The 10th day of Nisan, Shabbos Hagadol, corresponds to Teves. We said that's why it's called Shabbos Hagadol, because it's the yard site of Avram Avinu, Ha'adam Hagadol Ba'anokim, which means the first day of Nisan corresponds to the whole Chodesh. Now, who is the Nasi of Chodesh of the first day of Nisan? Nachshon ben Aminadav. That means that Shevet Yehuda is most closely associated with Chodesh Nisan. Says the Shar Yisachar. Amazing. You know why? Ben Nisan Nigalu v'Nisan Hasidin Ligal? Because since the entire month is associated with Shevet Yehuda and the Malchus Beis Dovid, therefore this is the most propitious month, the month which is designated for Asidin Ligael. This is the month of Dovid HaMelech. By the way, says the Munkacher, one of the reasons why Rebbe said, when it's Rosh Chodesh, say Dovid Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, because the gematria of Dovid Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam is Rosh Chodesh. The gematria of Rosh Chodesh is Dovid Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim. So this is the month of Rosh Chodesh. It's a month that every day has Kedushas Rosh Chodesh. Therefore, it's specifically the month of Shevet Yehuda, the month of the Malchus Beis Dovid, and it's the most propitious time for the Geula to come. Now, if I could share with you just an amazing revelation of the Bnei Yisachar, who the Bnei Yisachar quotes a great Mekubal, Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. The Medrash says on Parshas Hachodesh, Hachodesh hazel lachem Rosh Chodashim. This month will be for you the beginning of the months. Says the Medrash, L'kayeh ma shenemar. This is in fulfillment of that which it says, Bi malachim yimleichu. In me, kings shall reign. Now this is very mysterious. What does Hachodesh Hazel Lachem? Again, Lachem we said is Osios Melech. What do these words have to do with Bi Melachim Yimleichu? Says the Bnei Yisachar, he found, and this is in the, if you have a Sefer Bnei Yisachar, it's in Maimer Beis. He says he found in the writings of the Mekubal Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. We find in the Medrash on the Pasuk. This is in Parak Kuf Lamed Tes in Tehillim. Amarti, I said, Ach choshech yeshufeni. darkness will enclose me. What does this pasuk talk about? This pasuk is referring to King Yoshio HaMelech. When he found the pasuk, Yoilech Hashem oischa v'esmalkecha, that God will take you and your king, so Yoshio HaMelech said, maybe darkness will enclose me, and sovereignty, Malchus, will end with me. But then Yoshio continued in the next pasuk, V'layla or ba'adeni. Says Yoshio, he who illuminated for Israel in Egypt and on the Yam, like it says, Vayo'er es halayla, he will illuminate my Malchus. And I will see my grandson, Malchus will stop in his days, but Malchus will continue with me. It's a very mysterious medrash. The medrash says Yoshio HaMelech, when he got to the pasuk Yoelech Hashem es Malkacha, he said, Choshech yishufeni, maybe Malchus will end with me. But then when he realized that God illuminated for the Jewish people, so he said, Malchus will stop with my grandson, Menashe. So this is a very mysterious medrash. Number one, why would Yoshio think Malchus would end with him? He was a tzaddik amor. He was Ruach Apenu Mashiach Hashem. Number two, what does the fact that God illuminated for the Jewish people Mitzrayim and Alayam got to do with him? Number three, he says, Malchus will stop with my grandson. Who told him that? And if he saw that it would stop with his grandson, then why did he say it would stop with him? And what does darkness got to do with the end of his Malchus? Says Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, not to be confused with Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, not to be confused with the Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. This is Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. We find in the Medrash, Ki yareach yikoin la'olam. Dovid's Malchus will reign forever like the moon. So from here we see Malchus Beis Dovid is compared to the moon. It's just like the moon, it gets bigger up to 15 days. So too the Malchus Beis Dovid gets greater and greater until 15 generations. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Yehuda, Kalev, Boaz, Oved, Yishai, Dovid, Shlomo is the 15th generation. So the Malchus Beis Dovid is compared to the moon, just like the moon gets bigger for 15 days, so too the Malchus Beis Dovid reaches its crescendo on the 15th generation. And just like the moon from 15 and on wanes, so from Rechavam until Tzidkiyahu is 15 generations. I didn't know that. It's amazing. From Avraham to Tzidkiyahu is 30 generations. 15 to Solomon, from Solomon to Tzidkiyahu is another 15. So Tzidkiyahu saw darkness. He's read the pasuk that says, Achoshech yishufeni, and he figured it would become dark in his generation and Malchus would end with him. And in fact, it was going to. Tzidkiyahu was blinded. Well, the Yefei Tayar says, I understand you want to compare Malchus Beis Dovid to the moon in terms of its greatness. From Avram to Shlomo is 15 doiros. But as opposed to Tzidkiyahu is 17 kings. So the Yefei Tayar seems to ask that Tzidkiyahu was not 15 kings from Rechavam, Tzidkiyahu was 17 kings from Rechavam. You hear this? So it's really 32 generations until Tzidkiyahu. The Birchas Shmuel gives the following answer. When we compare the Malchus Beis Dovid to the moon, we don't compare it to any old month. We compare it to the month we left Egypt. The month we left Egypt, there were 2 nights that were day. The night of Yetzias Mitzrayim was Laila Kayom Yair, and we have a chapter on that in the Pesach Sefer. But I don't know, I have to add another one because the night of Kriyas Yamsuf was also Laila Kayom Yair. Vayoyer es haloila, the pasuk says. So really, the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim, there were 17. There were 2 days of 2 nights of day. So then the month has 2 extra days. If so, Yoshio thought the Malchus would end with him, because he's the 15th generation from Rechavam. And therefore he said, Achoshech Yeshufeni. He thought the Malchus meant the end of the moon. But then he said, if God who illuminated Klal Yisrael Mitzrayim Alayam, so he created 2 extra days in that month, so he'll give me 2 extra generations of Malchus as well. That was the argument. That's what Tzidkiyahu thought. He at first thought he's generation 15. So if generation 15, it's all over. But then he realized that when Malchus Beis Dovid is compared to the lunar month, it's not any lunar month, it's the lunar month of Nissan, which is an additional 2 days. These are the words of Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. Now I'm not sure how that answers the question of Yeravam of Tzidkiyahu being the 17th generation, but let's see how the Bnei Yissaschar explains this. Says the Bnei Yissaschar, now we can explain the matters beautifully. Hachodesh hazel lachem. What's the double hey? What's the double hey? Hachodesh hazeh. What does the word lachem mean? What this means is bi malachim yemleichu. The reason why it says hazeh, you know why it says hazeh? So that hazeh could be gematria 17, so that the Malchus Beis Dovid could continue 17 generations from Shloimeh. Begematria Yud Zayin Shachodesh Hazeh Yeh Boy Achilek Habez Yud Zayin Yomim, and it will be for you, for the Malchus Beis Dovid, so that the Malchus Beis Dovid should not end in the days of Yoshiyahu. Interesting. That's the meaning of Hachodesh Hazeh. In other words, why Hachodesh Hazeh? It should say Hachodesh Zelachem. Hazeh indicates Rebbeinu Shalom extended the Malchus Beis Dovid 17 generations, because as Malchus Beis Dovid is compared to the moon, it's not a 15-day cycle, it's a 17-day cycle. Hence, Malchus continued from Tzidkiah and another 2 generations until Tzidkiah's son. This is one of the major connections between the moon and the Malchus Beis Dovid. So that is why Nisan, which is the month of Rosh Chodesh, the month of Dovid, the month of Benisan Nigalu, or Benisan Asidan Ligoel, that is the connection between Nisan being elected as the first month of the year and the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. Because the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh is bound to the Malchus Beis Dovid, hence it's bound to Chodesh Nisan, which is the month of the Malchus Beis Dovid. So we should be zoicha that as we usher in the new month, and really the new year, the Rosh Hashanah L'Melachim, we should be zoicha to see the coming and the fruition of Esemach Dovid Avdecha. By the way, the name Dovid, the word Dovid, is a reference to the Shechina. Where do we see that? It's interesting Gemara in Psachim. I think you're probably coming to it, or you already came to it. Daf Kuf Yud Zayin. The interesting Gemara in Daf Kuf Yud Zayin. The Gemara says, sometimes Dovid had the Shechina come to him and then he sang Shira. Sometimes he sang Shira and then the Shechina came to him. When it says Lid David Mizmar, first came the Shechina and then he sang. When it says Mizmar Lid David, first he sang and then came the Shechina. Where does it say anything about Shechina in this pasuk? Why does Lid David Mizmar mean first the Shechina came and then he sang, and Mizmar Lid David means first he sang and then the Shechina came? It says Rabbi Yosef Engel in his famous drush called Maimar Dovid, that the word Dovid is a reference to the Shechina itself. Why is that? Because Dovid is the moon, and the moon merely reflects the light of the Shechina. Dovid is Malchus. Malchus reflects Tiferes. So we should be zoicha that Tiferes and Malchus should be Nisyached, and that Malchus should be Makabel, all the Shefa from Tiferes. Should be zoicha to the coming of the Malchus Beis Dovid, Benisan Nigalu uVenisan Asidan Ligal. Okay, we're gonna be starting momentarily the Chumash here. I mean the Tefillah share.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.